recently, I've been playing more games and streaming a lot more too. I wish I could say it was out of the kindness of my heart, but January is rolling around pretty soon, and I do need to get off my ass and play some games for a certain video that shall not be named. And one of those games I've been streaming is an early access indie game called Ovis Loop. You play as a robotic sheep in a world that has been utterly ravaged. There's the mole man diggers, the hyenas that scavenge the wasteland, and the most dangerous group of all, the wolves. The military that runs the wasteland under their leader, Dr. Wolf. Fantastic name, by the way, who's conducting mutagenic experiments that turn his own soldiers into monsters. There's actually way more to this story that I'll get into later because Ovis Loop tells its story in a really neat way, so let's hop over from talking about that to talking about the gameplay. It's a roguelike that's similar to Dead Cells if you've ever played that. Functionally, the game is a very kinetic side-scroller, but the movement is reminiscent of Metroidvanias like Hollow Knight, or Kellypod? Does anyone remember Kellypod? I made a whole video about it. It's got a nice mashy basic attack with a responsive dodge roll that's on a short timer so you can't spam it. You even get the obligatory ground slam to squish enemies below you and speed up long falls. The game also appears to have taken a cue from Elden Ring with its poise system. Hit an enemy enough times and they'll be stunned for a bit. Wait, that's less like Elden Ring's poise and more like Dizzy from Street Fighter now that I think about it. Just like how its movement system seems to have taken cues from other games, so does the general structure of, well, the game. Like its general structure is something I've seen dozens and dozens of times before, specifically from roguelikes. You go from randomized room to randomized room that typically have a reward at the end, just like Hades. And these paths can also sometimes include little break spots like a shop or a small event, also like Hades. They're useful for adding a nice variety to the game, breaking up the monotony and so on, and adding to the ever-important lore. However, what makes Ovis Loop stands out from a lot of the other roguelikes is that you can see the entire path to the area's end boss on the map screen. This actually gives you a lot more agency than other roguelikes, since it means you can look ahead and actually plan out your path. Of course, this is still a randomized roguelike. You don't get to choose where anything is. A money cache might be after a shop, but you don't have to waste your time on that path if you don't want to. The room you'll be seeing most often, and what you'll be doing most often, is putting Ovis Loop's fantastic combat system into practice. As I mentioned before, the game plays similarly to Dead Cells, almost down to the buttons. However, rather than collecting support items, you collect support moves, which are mapped out to your back buttons and triggers. There's different status elements they can inflict like lightning and fire, but the thing I find coolest about them is that on your runs you can further enhance them. Finding a duplicate skill doesn't mean you got the same skill twice, it means you have the opportunity to enhance that skill to the next level, adding another move you can tack onto it. But you also don't need to use these new moves immediately. This lets you create your own combos where you use your LB1, then your LT1 before going into your LT2, and then RB1 and so on and so forth. It makes the combat very fast and extremely free-flowing, where you're going straight from one attack to the next. And the support moves you get are super diverse in form and function. Some are charge moves where you have the chance to hold them down to really take a big swing. Others are projectiles like Gunflame from Guilty Gear, where you send fire across the ground, or maybe throw a Getsuga Juji Sho for good measure. And of course, we have the close range stuff, and I don't really have any nerd references for those, so insert your own here. They not only have cooldowns, but they're also gated behind these orbs, which is a bit of a bummer. But it does add an interesting aspect to build, since you have to balance these resources. Do you make the cooldown shorter to increase the orb cost, or vice versa? All of this really helps the game, because if I had to describe the combat in one word, it's hectic. This game is just pure chaos, more so than any other roguelike I've played. There's just so much happening on screen that there's no real room to slow down and think out your next move. You just have to go, relying on quick, reflexive actions instead of a strategy. It honestly made the game great to stream, since it wasn't too hard to talk while playing it. Actually, speaking of streaming, I should be live around this time this video goes up, so do be sure to check that out, and also like and subscribe. It's worth noting that even though Ovis Loop has the same general controls as other games, it doesn't feel anything like them. The specifics of Ovis Loop's gameplay that makes it stand out are namely the two kinds of modifications you can pick up on your runs. The first of which being the sword icons on the map, which are for weapon modifications. These mods tend to be the ones that affect the cooldown and orbs that I mentioned, but they can also do stuff like give you crit on the last hit of your basic combo or add elements to basic attacks. The next big thing that impacts your run are the upgrades you pick up after you beat a mini-boss or buy in the shop. These are yet more buffs that persist throughout your run. What's cool is that you visit villages at the end of every section of the game, and it's here that you get the opportunity to not only trade your items but also buy skill slots. This is where you unlock the third slot for those active skills you use. But this is also where you get more red slots for the passive buffs that you get whenever you get a duplicate skill that I forgot to mention before. When you're not battling, you'll often run into these smaller event spaces which usually add to the game's world building, like a crashed meteor site or two groups getting into a conflict forcing you to pick a side. They also dispatch buffs but add to the ever important lore. But I'll get into that later because it's not the time to talk about it. The two kinds of currency the game deals in is first called Blue P, which I just called Bloop, and Monium, which I just called Orange. You can probably guess why. Bloop is just used to buy stuff in the shops, but the real important stuff is the orange Monium. Every time you die and get tossed onto this pile of sheep corpses, it's the Monium that stays with you and what you get to spend in the hub world to do permanent upgrades. You can buy starting modules which can do things like revive you when you die or increase the amount of bloop you get from killing enemies. The coolest thing you can spend Monium on are the weapons, and to be honest, I only ever bought one weapon, mostly because one option is clearly cooler than literally everything else. And it's the fucking gun sword. And yes, it is just as fucking sick as it sounds. The way it works is that every push of the basic attack button fills the chamber, and once it's filled, and you don't even have to do a combo or even hit an enemy, meaning you can queue up this big blast by swinging at the air. It makes the weapon super versatile and unironically helped carry me through my later runs. The third kind of currency you can spend are data chips, which you get for collecting lore. Chips alongside Monium are used in the skill tree for your permanent upgrades, like extra slots so you can equip more moves, incentivizing you to seek out the lore. I'd be remiss not to mention the game's variety, from the weapons to the areas to the enemies you fight. Even enemy attacks have some nice variety to them because they borrowed that system from Sekiro with their dangerous attacks, where you have to truly dodge them by getting out of the way rather than just using your dodge roll. I have been praising this game too much, so I do think it's time for me to talk about my issues with it, namely that the levels do look nice and they are varied, but they are honestly fairly boring from a design standpoint. The enemies in them are good, they force you to respond differently and lean into the hectic, chaotic feeling of the game, but the level design is just so boring. Remember how I mentioned you have wall jumps in that ground slam? Well, I only remembered I had that when looking at the footage because the levels are just so flat. The levels do have traps and stuff, like these, jet boosters, I guess. I'm not sure what to call these. They shoot fire when you get close. But these traps and enemies don't hide the fact that you just go left from right, barely making use of your movement tools. Honestly, if anything, they get in your way, mostly the wall jump because I found myself accidentally clinging to ledges when I'm trying to fight. There's also the fact that the game is pretty easy, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything. I beat the game in like 2-3 hour sessions. That's not much time to reach as far as this game has gone in early access. To the game's credit, the bosses did give me trouble, but I feel like that's because they can be overwhelming at times, you know? It's the Potemkin effect from Guilty Gear, you know? The way when you see this big nigga stepping towards you, you just kind of panic. And they do hit hard, but after you get over your panic and just play moderately well, it's not super hard to get past them. The move that truly gave me trouble was the last boss's grab attack. I just couldn't figure it out. My favorite boss of the entire game is probably the second one, since it teleports around like Placidusax, constantly trying to catch you lacking. But it's just not enough. Once you get yourself together and lock the fuck in, it's not too hard to win. And I do think it's a little too easy to buy the permanent upgrades. The third boss definitely would have gotten me if I hadn't purchased the revive so quickly. Now that I've complained, it's time for me to talk about what I like most about Ovis Loop. Its storytelling. Ovis Loop is very obscure with its story, rarely telling you anything outright. Even as you chase down the main villain, it'll leave you with a lot of questions. But as you play, you'll come across scattered documents that detail the history of this world. The fact that it used to be all healthy and fertile before a meteor struck, ravaging the planet and giving it monium. Dr. Wolf wanted to use it to further enhance the animal inhabitants, but ran into a snag, resulting in the use of cybernetic enhancements to help the body tolerate the mutations. There's also the blue blood of sheep, which can be used to aid in the process, explaining why you're tossed onto a sheep pile when you lose a run. And all that stuff you've been collecting, blue pea, it isn't just money, it's the sheep's blue blood. And then there's the character you're playing as, the shepherd. Are they Alpha or Omega? And what is the Omega Project? And how come when you beat Dr. Wolf, things just kind of happen again? Is there a time loop or something going on? Everything is told through documents, data entries, singular lines from characters, making it read like one of those old novels where everything is told through letters and documents, making for a unique gaming experience. And if you're not keen on keeping track of the story that way in your head, you also have the hub. It has a conspiracy board showing all the connections and the way things have happened based on your findings, so the story isn't totally obscure like this is Dark Souls. Overall, I'm really impressed with Ovis Loop. It has a lot of things going for it with very few getting in the way. From gameplay to story and visuals, it pretty much knocks it all out of the park. And whatever issues I have with this game can certainly be smoothed over. It's in early access after all. And it's super cheap too, at 16 bucks, and I do know it goes on sale, so do be sure to give this a try if you ever find it. And with that, I think we're pretty much at the end of the video. So do be sure to like and subscribe while I move on to our Patreon shoutouts. Special thanks to Wolfrix, Macoides, Garen LaFay, Tron, and Zora Chow. The end of hope and the beginning of despair. Thank you for watching. Do be sure to like and subscribe. As always, this is Roast Fury signing out.